Welcome to Media Errata. I am Dante Ruffalo, and this is the only news source for intelligent consumers. If you're an intelligent person who needs factually accurate news, my postings seek to disseminate knowledge better than the errant media ever will. Each week, I will post in-depth explanations of the most important stories which have been misreported on network media, and I challenge the heads of the global networks to report with as much accuracy as I do. I'll gladly take on any news executive. I'm a humble person, but there are two things I've never been modest about. One, nobody alive knows the news as well as I do, and two, I can host the Charlie Rose Show just as well as Charlie Rose. This week, I'll be discussing mistakes made by Bloomberg media in reporting that China is on the brink of becoming the reserve currency. I'll also discuss the disastrous impact Mitt Romney's economic policy has had in countries where it was employed. Also, media around the globe misreported the reasons for the sudden drop in the Dow yesterday and the day before. And finally, I'll explain why suspension of yet another Bitcoin exchange should heed warning as to what will come. And now, time for the news. First up, Mitt Romney's economic policy. A shocking reality is that the people who write the news don't even know the GDP growth rate of the country in which they live and vote. So it should come as no surprise that they are entirely incapable of even the most rudimentary economic analysis. Enough time has passed since the 2012 election that we can now use historical econometric data to conduct a post hoc analysis of the various economic policies proffered by our presidential candidates. Many people are surprised to hear Mitt Romney's exact economic policy was employed by the 19-member Eurozone. In every country that used the identical economic policy as the former presidential candidate, GDP growth fell into negative territory, bringing double and triple-dip recessions. Conversely, the United Kingdom, which is not a member of the currency union, applied the same economic policies as Barack Obama and Ben Bernanke. The controversial part of Mr. Bernanke's policy is quantitative easing, or QE. Quantitative easing is what Republicans call printing money, or otherwise known as loose monetary policy. It is true the Fed is printing money and buying government bonds to inject the cash into the monetary system, but the Republican solicitude over inflation failed to materialize because Mr. Bernanke, a former Princeton economics professor and expert in economics of the Great Depression, knew very well that without demand, you can print money endlessly and there won't be a pickup in the inflation rate. What quantitative easing does is increase the money supply, which devalues the US dollar relative to foreign currencies. This makes the buying power of foreign businesses stronger so that they are encouraged to buy more of our exports. The corresponding increase in exports raises GDP growth and results in a greater need for more workers, which decreases unemployment. Controlling inflation and unemployment is the dual mandate of the Federal Reserve, which Ben Bernanke is the retired head of. The UK, which also utilizes quantitative easing, has a GDP growth rate of 3.2%, which is about the same as the United States, and it also has a similar level of unemployment. This quantifies which economic policy was the correct one and which policy was not. Next up, Bitcoin. This week, it was reported that one of the largest Bitcoin exchanges suspended operations after finding hackers had stolen millions of dollars in Bitcoin. The digital currency Bitcoin is fascinating in design. It is comprised of an elegant equation, the solution to which yields a unit that is limited in supply to 21 million. Supercomputers, kept cool near the Arctic Circle, work ceaselessly, processing the equation in what is called Bitcoin mining. It is a libertarian techie's dream come true. The problem with Bitcoin, however, is so simple it's almost stunning Bitcoin creators didn't take it upon themselves to learn how currencies operate before efforting the complex machinations that sustain its virtual existence. Since its inception, Bitcoin has fluctuated from around $20 per Bitcoin to over $1,500. Last year, when China announced it would prohibit use of the currency, its price dropped nearly 50% in one day. 2 weeks later, Bitcoin had another snag when an exchange on which it is traded was hacked, resulting in a $500 million loss and bankruptcy. Those who tout Bitcoin as the currency of the future are quick to assert pride in the fact that it is decentralized, meaning that there is no central banking system controlling it. And there in lies their flaw. Technology places a ceiling of 21 million on Bitcoin, but nothing gives it a floor, which is why it fluctuates without control. In contrast, the US dollar is reined in by the Federal Reserve, who will buy back excesses until value is again stabilized. For a currency to be successful, it must be a unit of exchange and also a stable store of value. Bitcoin is very easy to exchange, but if one moment you have only half as much as you did the minute before, who would take the risk to store significant wealth in such a currency? Bloomberg reported this week that after providing financial assistance to Russia and more recently Venezuela, China is en route to replacing the IMF as the lender of last resort and subsequently becoming the reserve currency. When the IMF lends alien nations money, it does so on strict conditions of drastic economic policy guidance. The reason the IMF insists on implementation of these measures is because without them, the beleaguered recipient country will continue profligacy without ever instituting rectifying economic measures. China, in contrast, lends with only one condition, that of loyalty to China and no one else. This may sound appealing to countries initially, but no country has an unlimited supply of money with which to repeatedly bail out economies that fail to manage themselves. For this reason, Bloomberg Media was wrong in saying that China will replace the IMF and become the reserve currency. After one or two bailouts, to countries pledging loyalty to their nation, China's ability to further support foreign economies will run dry. Therefore, the Chinese yuan will not be replacing the US dollar in the foreseeable future. The media reported on Monday that the 300-point loss in the Dow Jones Industrial Average was a result of the price of oil falling below $50 per barrel. There is a legitimate argument which attributes risk of deflation in the Eurozone to the price of oil, but that was not the catalyst for Monday's slide. In Europe, it was announced last Friday that the Greek Prime Minister will hold a snap election on January 25th. The political party in the lead is Syriza, headed by opposition leader Alexis Tsipras. Earlier in the year, Tsipras, buoyed on the populist outrage from the harsh austerity measures imposed by the IMF, touted if elected, he would force Greece to leave the Eurozone. Voters in Greece were ebullient at the announcement there may be an end to the austerity measures, but that is a reflection of Greek media failing to inform them of the consequences of Mr. Tsipras's proposal. If Greece leaves the Eurozone and reinstates its former currency, the drachma, there will be a run on the banks for all the remaining euros. The reason is because you cannot institute a new currency in an economy that is contracting without the value of that currency plummeting. As people withdraw the last remaining euros, banks will freeze savings accounts, leading to a credit crisis. Also, as the value of the drachma plunges, the cost of paying interest on Greek debt will become more difficult because the loans are fixed in nominal terms of the euro. You don't want to pay interest on your loan in a currency worth less than the currency you used to take the loan out on. This would lead to contagion among all the European banks because, in particular, French banks hold excessive amounts of Greek debt. Greece leaving the euro destabilized the anemic economic recovery across Europe, which will carry over to the United States. And that is why the market dropped 300 points. That's all for the news this week. The media will always misreport so long as they continue to plagiarize from each other. I am able to tell which news source a particular media network is plagiarizing from because they incorporate into their output the mistakes made by the other networks. This is how all news networks operate, but once a subject is erroneously spread across global media, it becomes fact in the minds of the viewer. It is as though the news media has no sense of intellectual responsibility. For more depth on the topics discussed in this week's episode and for further news stories that bear my name as testament to their accuracy, check my blog, DanteRuffalo.com. Thank you, and have an enlightened week.